Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who taught you how to stand tall. Sometimes love sounds like criticism. And sometimes, the only way to earn respect from your father is to survive the way he never thought you could. I still remember that night, the night my father broke me in front of everyone. The air smelled of burnt coffee and rain-soaked wood, and the old veterans' hall buzzed with the sound of laughter, medals clinking, and stories too proud to be true. He was the hero of the room. Colonel James Parker, retired Navy officer, local legend. And I was his daughter, Lena Parker, the quiet one who never lived up to his name. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, a community fundraiser honoring veterans and their families. But to him, it was always more than that. It was about appearances, about pride, about proving that the Parker bloodline never cracked under pressure. When my name was called for a small volunteer recognition, just a local mental health outreach program, I stood up, nervous but smiling. The host handed me a small certificate. People clapped politely. I thanked them, my voice shaking a little. Then came his laugh. Loud, deep, the kind that stopped every other sound in the room. "My daughter helping veterans with feelings," he said, raising his glass. "I guess we can't all fight real battles." The room chuckled awkwardly. My face burned. I looked at him, hoping he'd see what he'd done, but his smile only grew. That's when I saw the man sitting beside him. Younger, built like he'd been carved out of discipline. The kind of posture that never relaxes. Ethan Cross, my father's former SEAL trainee. He'd been deployed overseas with Dad years ago, and now he was back, handsome, quiet, eyes sharp enough to see through people. He didn't laugh. He just stared at my father, then at me. I forced a smile and said softly, "Some battles aren't fought with guns, Dad." He smirked. "No, sweetheart. Some are avoided with excuses." The laughter returned, louder this time. I excused myself, muttering something about needing air, and slipped outside into the cool night. My eyes stung, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not because of him. The door creaked open behind me. Footsteps. Then a low voice. "Lena." I turned. It was Ethan. His tone was careful, steady. "You okay?" I tried to laugh. "Yeah, just proud to be the punchline tonight." He studied me for a moment. His presence was calm, grounding, but his eyes carried something else, recognition, maybe. "Your dad's complicated," he said. "That's one word for it." He hesitated, like he wanted to say more but wasn't sure if he should. Then he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "When he used to talk about you overseas, he called you Black Widow." I frowned. "What?" "It was his code name for you. Nobody knew why. He never explained it. Just said, if anything happens to me, tell Black Widow she's stronger than she thinks." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My father, the man who'd spent my whole life reminding me I wasn't tough enough, had given me a name that meant danger, resilience, power. I looked up at the glowing windows of the hall. Inside, he was laughing again, surrounded by his old comrades, the hero he wanted everyone to see. But for the first time, I saw something else, a man who didn't know how to love without wounding, who'd hidden his affection behind ridicule. I turned back to Ethan. He never told me that. He smiled faintly. Maybe he didn't know how. The wind carried the sound of clinking glasses from inside, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. And in that strange, quiet moment outside the Veterans Hall, I realized that sometimes, even cruelty can carry a message, if you're brave enough to read between the lines. But I also knew one thing for sure. My father's story wasn't finished. And neither was mine. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Sunlight stretched across the old wooden floor, landing on framed photos of a man who'd spent his life in uniform, smiling next to people who weren't me. My father's medals hung on the wall like trophies from a war he never stopped fighting. I made coffee, but the smell brought no comfort. Every sound, the kettle, the ticking clock, seemed to echo last night's laughter, his words cutting through the quiet like they were still hanging in the air. I thought about what Ethan said. He called you Black Widow. It didn't make sense. My father wasn't sentimental. He didn't use nicknames, didn't leave clues, didn't talk about feelings. And yet he'd carried that code name for me halfway across the world. When he came downstairs, I was waiting. "Morning," he said flatly, pouring himself coffee without looking at me. I didn't answer. I just watched him. He finally noticed. "What?" "Black Widow." He froze mid-sip. His jaw tightened. "Where'd you hear that?" "Ethan," I said. "He told me you used to call me that." He set the mug down slowly. "That was a long time ago." "What does it mean?" I asked. His eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." For a moment, I saw something flicker in his expression, fear, maybe, or regret. But then the walls came back up. "It doesn't matter," he said, turning away. "You think too much about things that don't." I stood there, the anger rising again. "You humiliated me last night, Dad. In front of everyone. And you still can't say you're sorry." He stopped at the door, his back to me. "You want me to apologize for toughening you up? Toughening me up?" My voice cracked. "You made me feel small." He turned then, eyes hard. "You're small, Lena. That's the problem. You're smart, but you don't have grit. You think caring about people makes you strong. It doesn't. It makes you weak." I took a shaky breath. "Then why did you tell Ethan to call me Black Widow?" He hesitated. Then, quietly, "Because even the smallest spider can bring down something 10 times its size." And with that, he walked out. The door slammed behind him, leaving silence in its wake. For hours, I sat there replaying his words. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing either. Somewhere inside that hard shell, he'd seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself. That evening, Ethan called. "I didn't mean to stir things up last night," he said. "He didn't take it well, did he?" "Not exactly," I said with a dry laugh. He paused. "You know, he wasn't always like that. After your mom passed, he changed. Closed off. The rest of us thought he just couldn't handle the loss." I swallowed hard. He never talked about her. Ever. "He used to keep a photo of her in his vest pocket," Ethan said quietly. "Right under his badge. He'd touch it before every mission. Said she was his compass." My chest tightened. "I think he calls you Black Widow," Ethan continued, "because she loved spiders. Said they were misunderstood, strong, patient, quiet. He told us once you used to save them instead of squashing them when you were little." I closed my eyes. A memory surfaced, me, 5 years old, cupping a small spider in my hands while my dad told me to kill it. I'd cried when he tried to make me. My mom had laughed and said, "She's my little Black Widow. She protects what others fear." He'd rolled his eyes back then, but I remembered the way he'd smiled when he thought I wasn't looking. I opened my eyes, my throat tight. "He never told me that." "Maybe he couldn't," Ethan said softly. "Some men don't know how to love without turning it into armor." I sat there for a long time after we hung up, staring at the photo of Mom on the mantel. Her smile was gentle, her eyes the same green as mine. Maybe Black Widow wasn't an insult. Maybe it was the only way my father knew how to keep a piece of her alive in me. But if that was true, if somewhere deep down he still loved me, then why did he keep pushing me away? Something told me there was more. Something he wasn't saying. And I was done being afraid to find out. The box was buried in the attic under layers of dust and old uniforms that still smelled faintly of metal and rain. I hadn't been up there in years. My father hated when I went through his things, but after that morning's fight, I couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan said, about my mom, about the name, about the stories my dad refused to tell. The air was thick with dust and silence. A single beam of light from the small window cut across the floor, catching on something metallic. I pulled it out, a weathered trunk, locked but brittle with age. The name J. Parker was stenciled in fading letters. Inside, I found photos, medals, folded flags, and beneath them, a stack of journals. Each one marked with deployment dates and coordinates. Some pages were filled with tactical details, operations, training notes, but others felt different. Personal. Handwritten in a way that felt unfamiliar for a man like him. The first entry that caught my eye was dated the year my mom died. "Missions don't scare me anymore. Coming home does." I see her in Lena's eyes. Same defiance, same heart. God help her, she'll need it. She doesn't know how cruel the world is yet. My breath caught. It was the first time I'd ever seen him write about me. Further down, another line, "She saved a spider today." Cried when I killed it. I told her the world doesn't have room for softness. She told me that means the world needs more of it. She's 5. How does she already know what I keep forgetting? I closed the journal, my throat tight. For the first time, I felt the weight of what he carried, the grief he never named, the guilt that hardened him. I stayed up there for hours, reading fragments of a man I didn't recognize. One page mentioned Ethan. Cross reminds me of myself at 20. Quick to anger, slow to listen. I hope he learns what I didn't, that strength without compassion is just another kind of weakness. And then, tucked between pages, a folded photograph. My mom, holding me in her arms. On the back, written in my father's uneven handwriting, "For Black Widow, my reason to keep fighting." I sat there trembling, tears spilling down my face before I even realized it. He hadn't called me that to mock me. He'd called me that to remember her. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked around me, every sound magnified by the quiet. I heard the front door open softly, like someone trying not to wake me. I peeked from the hallway. It was my father. He stood there, silhouetted in the dark, holding his jacket like a shield. His shoulders looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. "Dad," I said softly. He froze. "You're up." I found the journals. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You shouldn't have gone through that." "Why not?" "They're about me. About Mom." He looked at me then, really looked at me. His eyes were tired, but not angry. Because some memories hurt more when they're shared. I stepped closer. "Then why keep them?" He hesitated. "Because forgetting her felt worse." The silence between us stretched until it almost felt fragile. Finally, I said, "You called me Black Widow because of her, didn't you?" He nodded once, eyes glistening. "She was fearless. So are you." I just didn't know how to tell you without breaking. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. I reached for his hand. For a second, he didn't move, but then, slowly, his fingers curled around mine. His grip was rough, but steady. In that small moment, the years of distance, pride, and unspoken pain between us began to shift. We stood there, two people bound by love too complicated for words, and for the first time, I didn't need him to say anything more. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Because buried somewhere in those journals was a story he still hadn't told, the one that made him the man he became. And I was finally ready to hear it. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by my father's journals. The sunlight coming through the window fell across the pages, soft and golden, like the world was trying to make the past look gentler than it really was. He walked in quietly, no bark in his step this time. He glanced at the journals spread out, then poured himself a cup of coffee. For once, he didn't tell me to put them away. I looked up at him. "There's something in here you're still hiding, isn't there?" He didn't answer. He just took a sip, eyes distant. Not everything in those pages was meant to be remembered. "Dad," I said softly, "you spent years writing it down. That means part of you wanted someone to read it someday." He stared at me for a long moment, then finally sighed. "You really want to know?" "Yes," I whispered. "I need to." He sat down across from me, his hands rough and trembling slightly. "There was a mission," he began, voice low and slow. "It was supposed to be simple, rescue op, civilian extraction in the Gulf. We were ambushed. I made the call to move forward. It cost lives." I didn't breathe. He looked at his hands as if they still carried the weight of that night. "One of those men was your mother's cousin. We were kids together. When I came home, your mom could barely look at me. She said I let my pride get people killed." His voice cracked. "She wasn't wrong." My chest tightened. "You never told me that." He nodded. "I couldn't. I didn't want you to see me the way I saw myself. I thought if I could make you tougher, less like her, you'd never get hurt the way we did." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "You don't make people strong by breaking them." His eyes met mine, sharply at first, then softening. "I know that now. But back then, pain was the only language I knew." The silence between us stretched long and full. Outside, the wind brushed the trees, a sound so gentle it almost felt like forgiveness. I turned to one of the open journals, flipping through until I found another page marked with a folded corner. The handwriting there was more hurried, almost desperate. I don't know how to talk to her anymore. Every word I say sounds like a command. Every silence feels like cowardice. She reminds me of the parts of her mother I failed to protect. My voice trembled as I read it aloud. You wrote this after Mom died. He nodded slowly. I wrote it the night you stopped speaking to me. You were 16. You told me you wished it had been me instead of her. The memory hit me like a wave. I remembered the argument, how cruelly I'd said it, how he'd just stood there and walked away. I thought he didn't care. But that entry told another story entirely. I didn't mean it, I whispered. I know, he said quietly. But you were right. Part of me did die with her. Neither of us moved. The air felt thick with everything we'd never said, everything we'd buried under years of pride and pain. Finally, he stood and walked to the counter, pulling out something I hadn't seen in years, a small wooden box. He set it in front of me and opened it. Inside was a silver bracelet, old and tarnished, engraved with 2 words, Black Widow. She made it for you, he said. When you were born. Said you'd grow up fearless. I kept it after she passed. I thought you weren't ready. Truth is, I wasn't. I ran my fingers over the engraving, tears spilling freely now. You kept this all these years? He nodded. Because it reminded me that even after everything I lost, you were still here. I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. For the first time, we sat in silence that didn't hurt. He wasn't the hero I thought he was. But maybe he didn't have to be. Maybe he just needed to be human. As I held that bracelet, I realized the name Black Widow wasn't a burden, it was an inheritance. A reminder of my mother's strength and the fragile courage in both of us. And for the first time, I saw my father not as the man who broke me, but as the man who was still trying to put himself back together. It was his idea. The words came out of nowhere over breakfast. We should go see her, he said. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My father never went to the cemetery. Not once in all the years since my mother died. I used to go alone, leaving small flowers by the headstone, wondering what he felt when he stayed away. Now, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, he looked older. Smaller. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying something too heavy to set down. Are you sure? I asked carefully. He nodded once. It's time. The drive out to the cemetery was quiet. The radio stayed off. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the low whisper of wind through the open windows. The sky was soft gray, the kind that felt like it remembered every tear you ever shed. When we pulled up, he didn't get out right away. He just sat there, staring through the windshield at the row of stones ahead. I waited, giving him the silence he needed. Finally, he opened the door and stepped out. His movements were slow, deliberate. I followed him, carrying the small bouquet of daisies, Mom's favorite. The grass was damp under our shoes. The smell of earth and rain filled the air. When we reached her grave, he stopped. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. She hated that picture, he said quietly, pointing to the photograph etched on the headstone. Said it made her look too serious. I smiled faintly. She said you liked it because it made her look tough. He chuckled, a small, broken sound. Yeah, guess I needed to believe that back then. We stood there for a while. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. Just fragile. I knelt and placed the flowers down. Hey, Mom, I whispered. I brought him this time. He let out a breath, almost a laugh, but it caught in his throat. Then, without warning, he sank to his knees. His shoulders trembled. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. I thought I was protecting her. I thought if I made her hard, she'd never break like I did. But I just pushed her away. The sight of my father crying shattered something inside me and healed something else. I knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around him. You didn't lose her, Dad? Not really. She's in everything good you taught me. Even the parts you didn't mean to. He pulled me close, whispering, you sound just like her. For the first time, the words didn't make him sad, they made him smile. We stayed there for a long time, talking softly about things we'd buried for years. The stories he told weren't about medals or missions, but about her laugh, her stubbornness, how she used to sing off-key just to make me giggle. As the sun started to dip behind the trees, he stood up and brushed the dirt from his knees. You know, he said, she used to call you Black Widow too. Not because of strength or danger. Because you wove people together. Even when they didn't deserve it. I looked at him, eyes stinging. Guess that's one thing I didn't get from you. He smiled, a real one this time. Maybe it's the one thing I always hoped you would. The drive home felt different. Softer. The weight that had lived between us all those years had finally started to lift. When we got back, he stopped at the door and turned to me. You should have that bracelet, he said. Wear it. She'd like that. I nodded, holding it tightly in my hand as if it were made of something sacred. That night, when I went to bed, I placed it on my wrist. The metal was cool against my skin, but it felt alive somehow, like it remembered everything we'd been through. And for the first time, I didn't dream of fights or silence. I dreamed of laughter, sunlight, and my father's voice saying softly, I'm proud of you, Black Widow. I woke up smiling. The days that followed felt lighter, as if some invisible fog had finally lifted from the house. My father and I had fallen into an easy rhythm, coffee together in the morning, quiet dinners at night. No shouting, no walking on eggshells. Just peace. It was strange at first, this version of him that listened instead of commanded, that asked instead of ordered. He still had his sharp edges, but the hardness in his voice had softened. Maybe mine had too. One evening, while sorting through more of his old boxes, I found a sealed envelope tucked inside one of my mother's cookbooks. Her handwriting curved neatly across the front. For Lena, when you're ready. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a letter and a small photograph, Mom sitting in the garden, holding me as a baby. Behind us, my father stood in uniform, smiling at her in a way I had never seen before. The letter began simply, My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, it means life went on. I hope you've learned to forgive me for leaving too soon, and your father for the walls he built to survive it. I loved him fiercely, even when he forgot how to love himself. But you, my little Black Widow, you were always the thread that held us together. I stopped reading, the words blurring through tears. My father looked up from across the table. What is it? It's from her, I whispered. He stood slowly, eyes wide, like he was afraid to breathe. After all this time? I nodded and handed him the letter. He sat beside me, his hands shaking as he read. When he reached the end, he let out a trembling breath. Tell your father that love isn't supposed to make you invincible. It's supposed to make you brave. He closed his eyes, pressing the paper to his chest. She always had a way with words, he said quietly. She knew us better than we knew ourselves, I replied. We sat there in silence for a long time. It wasn't heavy or sad, it was full of everything we'd finally said, and everything we didn't have to anymore. Later that night, we framed the photograph together. He placed it on the mantel between his medals. She'd like it there, he said. I smiled. So do I. Over the next few weeks, life found its balance. He started volunteering at the Veterans Center, helping younger soldiers transition back into civilian life. The same man who once scoffed at therapy now sat in group sessions, talking about guilt, loss, and forgiveness. And me? I kept working at the outreach program. But something was different. My voice carried more confidence now. My story, the one I used to hide, became part of the way I connected with others. One afternoon, as I was closing up, Ethan stopped by. He smiled when he saw me. Your dad called me, he said. Said you two are good now. We're getting there, I said. It's strange learning how to love someone you thought you lost years ago. He nodded. That's the hardest kind of love. We stood there for a moment, comfortable in the quiet. Then he handed me a folded paper. He asked me to give you this. It was another note, from Dad this time, scrawled in his uneven handwriting. I used to think I needed to make you tougher. Turns out, you were already stronger than I ever was. I see that now. Thank you for not giving up on me. I smiled through tears, tucking the note into my pocket. He really wrote this? Ethan nodded. He did. And he meant every word. As he left, I stood in the doorway, watching the sunlight fade into gold. For years, I'd chased his approval. Now, I realized I didn't need it anymore, not because I'd stopped caring, but because I'd finally found peace in knowing who I was. Black Widow, I whispered to myself. Not a name he gave me. A name we earned. That night, my father and I had dinner like we always did. He told me about his day, about a new veteran who'd finally agreed to counseling. And then, without prompting, he said, "Your mom would be proud of you." It wasn't loud or dramatic, just simple. Real. And somehow, that made it mean everything. Autumn came quietly that year. The trees outside our house turned to gold, the air carried the smell of rain and wood smoke, and for the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like something I had to earn. It just lived there with us. Dad had started keeping a journal again, this time not about missions or regrets, but small things. The name of a veteran he'd helped that week, the recipe he'd tried from Mom's cookbook, the song he'd heard that reminded him of her. He was learning to live again, one honest page at a time. One Saturday, he called me into the living room. "I've been thinking," he said, setting his coffee down. "Maybe it's time we did something for her. Something lasting." "What do you mean?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Your outreach center, what if we opened a branch for veterans' families? Counseling, community work. A place where people can heal before they break." The idea hit me straight in the heart. "You mean, together?" "Yeah," he said. "Together." We spent the next few weeks planning, sketching names and logos on napkins, reaching out to people we'd once lost touch with. He called Ethan for advice. I brought in some of my volunteers. Every small step felt like a piece of us coming back together. On the day we finally opened the new wing, the Parker Foundation for Families of Service Members, the air was crisp, the sky the same soft blue as the day we buried Mom. Dad gave a short speech, hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "We build walls to survive," he said, looking out at the crowd, "but sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone climb over them." He looked at me then, his voice breaking just a little. "My daughter taught me that." People clapped, but I could barely hear them. I just kept my eyes on him. That old, proud spark finally softened into something better, something human. After everyone left, he stayed behind, sitting on the bench outside the building. I joined him, wrapping my scarf tighter against the wind. "She'd be proud," I said. He nodded slowly. "You know, I used to think your mother made you too soft. Turns out, she made you brave." I smiled. "She made us both brave." We sat there in silence, the sound of flags rustling above us. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a folded note, yellowed with age. "It's the last thing she ever wrote me," he said, handing it to me. I never opened it. "Thought maybe you should." I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was faint but unmistakable. "James, if you ever forget how to love, look at her. She's everything good in both of us. And if she ever forgets how strong she is, tell her this: Black Widow doesn't mean danger. It means survival." I looked up at him, eyes stinging. He smiled weakly. Guess she knew us too well. A tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't hide it. He just let it fall. I reached over, taking his hand. For once, it didn't feel like holding on, it felt like letting go of everything we'd been carrying. We stayed there until the sky turned amber, until the streetlights blinked on one by one. When he finally stood, his movements were slow, deliberate. "Come on, kid," he said softly. "Let's go home." And just like that, the words I'd been waiting my whole life to hear, "let's go home," finally meant what they were supposed to. That night, I placed Mom's letter and the silver bracelet together in the same wooden box. I didn't need to wear it anymore. It wasn't about the name now, it was about the story. The next morning, Dad left early for the center. He'd found a reason to get up again, a purpose that wasn't about guilt, but about giving back. Watching him walk away, I realized something simple and beautiful. We can't rewrite the past, but we can forgive it. And forgiveness, that's the truest kind of strength. As the sun rose, I whispered to the empty kitchen, "I love you, Dad." And somewhere deep in my heart, I heard it back. "I love you too, Black Widow."